Now, the pandemic has accelerated the role technology plays in our lives as governments, businesses, and people face new challenges and opportunities. We must come to realize one thing, that the world will not simply go back to where it was before. And here to share with us his thoughts on how to move forward is Michael Miebach, President and Chief Executive-elect of Mastercard. This fireside session will be moderated by Bloomberg's Jennifer Surane. Let's go over to Jennifer and Michael for the discussion.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Jenny Surane. I am a reporter at Bloomberg News. I write about the finance and the payments industry. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Mastercard's incoming CEO and their current president, Michael Miebach. Michael, thank you for joining me.
Hello, Jenny. Great to be with you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for doing this. I'm really looking forward to our chat today. I think it would be great, honestly, if you could maybe start off by walking me through a little bit of what you think some of the biggest changes have been in both consumers and businesses throughout this pandemic.
Yeah, if we look back the last 9 months, clearly there's been a lot of change. So behaviors have changed for people, for businesses across the board. So I took a step back on a couple of points throughout the year and said, well, what's really going on? What are some of the bigger things going on? And there's three headlines that I have in mind. And the first is, it's like ubiquity. Everybody has been affected by this pandemic, businesses, people. And as we look ahead and, with some of the positive news that we've just had with a vaccine being registered in the UK, and we look at coming out of the pandemic, I think this point of ubiquity needs to apply just equally. We need to get everybody out of this as well. So that's aspect number one. Aspect number two that comes to mind for me is really this notion of, while everybody has been affected, there's this big issue around inequity because not everybody has been affected in the same way. So just pick out SMEs. SMEs clearly hard hit, largest employer in the world, and we're having massive issues around SMEs. So as we think turning out of the pandemic, we need to ensure that we address this issue of inequity and build back to a world where everybody's kind of being part of it. And the last point is staying with words that end on equity, antiquity. So behaviors have changed. That was the starting point of your question. And recognizing that and saying behaviors have changed, but they have changed during the crisis. What do we do with these changing behaviors as we look forward out of the crisis? There's something in there that we can take and build an even better world. So three headlines that I have around what the changes were.
So ubiquity, inequality, and antiquity. Those are the
yes,
idioms I think I heard.
I think I said inequity, actually.
Well, maybe diving into that last one a little bit more. Walk me through some of the things that have really changed in both the consumer and the businesses in terms of their behaviors. Are they, moving away from some of the more antiquated forms of payments, or any other way that they're kind of approaching the way they pay for things?
Yeah, that's exactly what has been happening. So starting with April 2020, we were running monthly consumer research, like 14 countries around the world. We wanted to get a real sense of how consumers' minds and businesses' minds have been changing and how their behaviors have gone along with that. And with increasing consumer confidence, particularly during the summer, as infection rates were getting lower, you saw people talking about how they would use forms of digital commerce much more strongly going forward coming out of the crisis, and equally so in a study that we did specifically on SMEs. So our belief is, based on these studies, that some of these behaviors that people have been exposed to because they had to. If you were locked up at home and you wanted to buy groceries, you had to use an online service, and you liked the experience, why go back? And here, that's kind of a critical question. All the research shows that the majority of people will use more of such digital services going forward. Now, the point is, in the middle of the crisis, we addressed an immediate issue. So I'm not saying that I do believe people will not go to support their local store. Of course they will. So up their own Main Street, the restaurant, the local shop, wherever you shop, you will balance out. But I think we're going to have a sustained increase in digital commerce. That is probably the most fundamental change that we're going to see coming out of that. For fintech, for us as a payment tech company, that's a fundamentally positive development in the long run. But of course, we have an immediate crisis to deal with right now. But it makes me incredibly optimistic looking forward.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting question, and it definitely will be a really interesting thing to try and see, just how much of this is permanent. But I know everyone listening in can probably relate to the ordering groceries online, maybe for the first time during all of this, and kind of hard to imagine, going back and doing that all in person again. Obviously, I think we all want it to get back to normal, but definitely
Indeed.
some of this stuff.
My 70-year-old mother, she's ordering groceries online, unheard of.
Yeah, definitely. It's a new world we're living in.
Yes.
Well, kind of picking up off of what you just talked about then, I think it would be great to really understand, as a manager, as the next leader of Mastercard, how have you balanced living in the moment versus kind of simply navigating the pandemic and really thinking about how to get to the other side of this?
So here we're talking, Jenny, with the benefit of hindsight. Clearly, it felt a little different at the onslaught of the crisis back in the early days of March, where we all suddenly, within a week, we're all going into lockdown and we had to change the company, like turning on a dime to work from home, making sure the network is up and running with its onslaught of volume on the digital side. So all that is a bit of a distance past. But as I reflect back on how we've gone through the time to prevent that we would just be reacting to what was going on around us, I think what was instrumental was to change the mindset to believe that this thing will be over at some point. It's a transient event. So, having a belief that there will be a public health answer to the pandemic was absolutely critical, because that kind of flipped. Let's start to think about how the world thereafter might look like. And what gave our employees specifically some confidence in that is that in the early days, we got involved with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with the Wellcome Trust, to get into a therapeutics accelerator. So we ourselves had exposure to what was going on in the R&D front and how to get into vaccines. As a payment tech company, not necessarily the thing you would expect us to do, but we did, and it helped us with this belief. So that was essential. But the other thing that was essential was, while there is this big answer, in the meantime, because we don't know when the answer will come on the public health side, will we just float? Will we just be left to reacting? No, we said there is things that we can control. This can actually be managed. So a couple of things that we did to help with that. The first is recognizing that there will be steps on recovery other than the public health answer, things like testing, social distancing, changes in terms of how the world would operate, and we got involved in that. We got involved in that with our public. We have a health pass application that we started to engage governments on and say we can help to show people, hey, I've been vaccinated, or I'm actually have just been tested, etc. So this was learning agility, getting involved on things that we could contribute to. Again, the impact on staff was, yes, there's something that we can do. And I think the last thing that was so critical at the time was to have people focus on the long term. Was you got to give them some sort of peace of mind for the short term. So when we said early March there will be no layoffs in 2020 related to COVID-19, that gave peace of mind. As a result of which, with some of these examples on how we were leaning in, our teams were leaning in with our customers, reaching out and navigating together. We didn't have all of the answers. We were pretty clear about that, but we have a lot of data that can help to explain where the world is going to us and our customers. So with all of that, there was this motivation to think, let's think about the world beyond that. And the world beyond that, ideally, is not how it looked like in 2019, December. But it's a different world, and potentially a better world, because we can leverage our tech to make it a better world.
Absolutely. That's so fascinating. I think, it's been a crazy time for everyone, but it feels like you guys were really among the first to kind of, I think you broke it up into those 4 stages. And you talk a lot about maybe some of this isn't linear, and some folks are in the normalization phase. And now I feel like I listen to other companies' conference calls, and they've really they've adopted that language and adopted what you guys your view on all of this. So I think that's an interesting point also in terms of the way you guys have viewed this and handled this and how it's been adopted elsewhere.
It helped to put a framework around everything that I just said, to just run the company for these different phases. And you're right. When we first brokered that in an April earnings call, it was picked up. It just makes a lot of sense to structure your steps along the way.
It's nice everyone has kind of the same yardstick to understand the language you guys are using too. So helpful. I am curious. I guess when you guys were facing that moment where you knew that you had to kind of react to what was going on, but also wanted to kind of think long term. And you were also experiencing, what you talked about earlier with the massive acceleration in digital uptake. Did that cause you guys to, have to leave anything on the cutting room floor or accelerate maybe some of the plans that you have for different innovation? Just curious kind of, what it meant for your innovation strategy, back in the early days of the pandemic and now.
This is obviously an unprecedented pandemic, so nobody can really be prepared for that. But in a odd way, we were prepared for that, because a lot of the homework that the payment industry has done over the last couple of years, if you think about tokenization, for example, some of the groundwork was laid that came in, and reached scale just about at the right time when the pandemic hit. So we were able to react early on in the crisis to the onslaught of volume. Great examples, chargebacks. So think about the times of March and April when a lot of people had trips booked and they couldn't get onto trips any longer, and they returned the tickets and try to get the money back. And the merchants were saying, well, how about you take a voucher? That time with some of the investments that we have made, for example, with Ethica and our chargeback solutions, facilitating that kind of process and making it easier. That was the early days. And if you take that and say, chargebacks, disbursement programs, government sending out money, that was all what we did in the early phases of the crisis. And then you look ahead and say, well, the innovation agenda going forward. So here was yesterday's innovation helping us today. What do we have to do today as we look beyond? And then you start to think, let's take this disbursement stimulus packages situation. So a lot of countries are right now in discussions about a second or third stimulus package. They've found out at the beginning of the crisis that their payment infrastructure was potentially not the most modern, not geared to getting out stimulus packages fast enough, and getting them out in a way that the impact could be understood from the data coming back. Does the stimulus actually help here, this part of the economy, that part of the economy? So modernization going beyond what we have done with our technology, in terms of modernizing the underlying payment stack, the real-time payment solutions coming in to get more payments out with more data more quickly. That is the forward-looking part of that. Chargebacks was one example, but there will be other aspects on the consumer-facing solutions with digital-first payment solutions, where you don't even go for the physical card any longer. You do just take an immediately issued digital card, and you just stick with that. And that's a nice alternative and a nice addition to what you have been used to. So there's things that we've done to solve for the immediate crisis. But there's so many more things that we can do going forward to build an even better experience, an even safer experience.
I like the way you said that. Yesterday's innovation agenda got us through today, but now we have to think of the agenda that will get us through, the next event.
Exactly.
And I can only imagine how hard it is to set that agenda when I think everyone's now saying, we've seen 6 months of acceleration or 6 years of acceleration in 6 months. So I can only imagine the many late nights you guys probably had.
Look at me.
I did want to dig in. I think you mentioned earlier a little bit that you talked about, employees and kind of wanting to make sure that you took care of your employees and the folks that come up together every day to kind of make Mastercard what it is. How do you inspire people to kind of think long term about innovation, especially when so many of us are working from home and you're not able to kind of come in that room together and craft all these big plans on the whiteboard?
Look at us, Jenny. We're not in the same room. I'm looking at a camera. You're looking at a screen. We would probably have a somewhat different conversation if we were sitting in a big lobby of the Bloomberg building in Midtown. And it's the same for our employees. I have to say, big kudos to the team. Productivity hasn't really been impacted, but the world is exceptionally predictable and transactional these days. You get on a Zoom call to solve a particular problem. The conversation of let's just pop into this huddle corner and whiteboard, as you just said, it's not happening. And that is something that worries me. So from an innovation agenda, I do think while we have everybody fully on point and moving forward, I think this innovation of the future, it will be good for us to find ways on one hand, to take some of the best practices from leveraging video tools and so forth, but also to get people back together so they can interact in a common space. And with the news on vaccines, and I think this situation of us being able to get back together maybe earlier than we would have thought, I think is a real possibility. I'm looking forward to that. I think that will help. But in the meantime, I think we're making the most of it. And throughout these last 9 months, there was a whole new set of products that we have launched. But this is not something that is sustainable. We're on this is a long-term game, and I think getting back together and collaborating, we're just better at that as a company, I believe.
That's really interesting. And I would love, I guess, maybe as to get you to also talk about how you inspire clients and the other companies that you guys work with. I think you talked earlier about how you've been diving into data and services, and I know y'all have seen a huge uptick in consulting and cyber and data analytics this year. I guess I'm curious how you kind of convince clients that now is the time to be investing in all these new areas and focusing on the future, when I'm sure a lot of them, merchants and banks alike, are probably just trying to keep up with the craziness of operating through a pandemic.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing you said in the question where you said clients and partners. So this whole thing we talk about partnership. I'm sensing for 6-7 months at least a much higher willingness to partner than I've ever seen before. That's with government, that is with competitors, that is with kind of other ecosystem players. If you think about it in the world of payments, there is payment facilitators. There's all sorts of people that are making this industry what it is, and the idea of let's set aside some of our competitive tensions and see how we can partner to address some of these opportunities that we see in the innovation that we talked earlier about, or just some of the things that are in the way of serving SMEs in a better way than we have in the past, et cetera. So that's an excellent starting point. Willingness to partner, that's always been our mindset, reaching out and see what we can do, particularly when it comes to SMEs. I think a broader partnership answer is the better answer. There's capital needed, there's cybersecurity solutions needed, there's omni-channel capabilities needed. All of that in the mix will really help that sector. Now, clients very specifically. If you look at our business, we're like the finger on the pulse of of commerce, really. So our data, put us in a very unique position and gave us actually a unique responsibility throughout the crisis to start to explain the crisis, first of all to ourselves, but then to our customers. So this leaning in early on of saying, here's not 5 solutions that we can sell to you, but leaning in to say, let's understand what's going on in your competitive landscape, what's going on in the payment industry, and what we can do together. So as a result of that, using our Spending Pulse product and various other data solutions that we have, we got into the dialogue, okay, so how do we react? So co-creation, despite the challenges that we talked about and not being able to be in the same room, we did have quite a bit of co-creation with our customers at the time and said, well, so how do we react to that? Shopopenings.com is a classic example. Customers of our customers wanted to know if the shop around the corner when social distancing measures were relaxed was actually open or not. We have that data. We never used it for that purpose. So little example, but one that illustrates we went from understanding to analyzing, explaining, to reacting to the crisis. And that whole time, that sequence going through these various steps, put us in a position with our customers that, if you would have listened to some of our latest earnings calls, the last 2 quarters, overall engagement on deal momentum and partnerships that we're striking as we've positioned ourselves well in the mind of our customers for the years to come, it's really showing. So leaning in, being the best partner you can be, kind of like a motherhood and apple pie statement, but because we have the data and we have this unique position of this vantage point, like being the seismograph to these seismic changes around us, I think that was really instrumental.
Maybe in our last minute or two, Michael, it would be great to have you talk a little bit more about, why is now the time that our audience members should be focusing on innovation, especially given that probably requires a bit of an incremental investment at a time when some are just really struggling to even hold on.
Throughout our chat, I talked about how behaviors are changing. So that's the starting point to say, as there is more openness and consumers and businesses have gotten used to, because they had to new ways of doing commerce and doing digital commerce, now's the time to take that tailwind and think ahead. So that's one thing. The other aspect, though, is you look ahead and you assume, let's assume for a minute that sometime in the mid of 2021, we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We're turning out of this into a growth phase. Now is the time, ahead of that change coming, to invest ahead of the curve and make sure we have the right kind of solutions available at that point in time. It's also the time to get a few things right. We talked about SMEs, hardly hit. So what do we do today to make sure that this world going forward is actually working for SMEs? We've been for years on a path to drive towards a world where everybody's financially included. We put a goal out in April this year where we said we're going to find another 500 million people that are not financially included today and pull them into the ecosystem. We have to make the decisions today. We have to get the right digital solutions out there to have the right kind of low-cost digital solutions that works on a feature phone available at scale. So it's a few things that we have to do today other than just the openness and the willingness and the change in behavior. That's why now.
Well, I know we're all really excited to see what you do in the new role. Congratulations again, and I'm really looking forward to kind of following along the Mastercard story, as I'm sure most of our audience members are. So thank you again for joining me for this awesome conversation, and stay tuned.
Thanks, Jenny. Speak soon. Take care.
Thank you, Jennifer and Michael, for that engaging session. Now, if you tuned into that session, we heard Michael talk about how there's a higher willingness of people to partner up and put aside their competitive differences. I'm so happy to hear that because earlier today at the opening address, we heard the exact point made by Mr. Heng Swee Keat, the Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore. He talked about how everyone was working together through this pandemic crisis, and it was something he was very heartened to see. So so glad that across whatever borders, wherever you are in the world, the same experiences apply. So, well, innovation is truly important in this current climate. It needs to be made a priority to ensure continued growth post-crisis. So, in fact, history suggests that companies that innovate through a crisis will outperform its peers during the recovery. So everything that Michael and Jennifer just discussed, well, becomes truly important to ensure survival in the post-pandemic world. Now, a reminder for our viewers who are joining us online, if you are experiencing a lag with your video stream, the advice is to please refresh your page, and that should fix the problem.
I think we're just getting started with the fintech revolution. And I think one particular space, which is the SME segment, and